Well, let's get to my next guest. Her name is Isabel Oakeshott. She is a great friend of ours here at Talk, with being Talk's international editor. Hello, Isabel. How are you?
Good afternoon. Well, I'm not kind of feeling that I should be at the Notting Hill Carnival. I mean, it just never sounds any fun, really, does it? It's just a carnival of kind of carnage, really.
Well, I was about to say, Isabel, nothing screams carnival like boarding up shops and houses and then arresting 100 people and securing over 40 knives and 11 guns the day before the carnival, right?
Just not really my idea of a great day out or a great weekend out. I've long thought that carnival, so-called carnival, is past its time, and I just think probably we should be looking at other forms of entertainment at this point.
Well, I mean, it's a concern, isn't it? Because I think Sunday was when we saw this 140 arrests taking place, and this is dubbed Family Day of all days for the public, where we saw 105 people arrested at the event and 35 on the approaches, with offences including drugs, weapons, and even 15 were arrested for assaults on police officers, with one officer's hand being severely injured. I mean, as you say, it's a carnival of carnage rather than a carnival of celebration.
Yeah, and you know, each and every year there are so many problems, and it does seem this year as if the authorities are a little bit more on top of it. They seem to be preempting trouble. They've used I think they've been using some new technology to try to sort of pick off and identify the known troublemakers. And I suppose that if this year's event passes with no actual stabbings and murders, like serious stabbings and anyone actually losing their life, well, that would be quite a victory for the Notting Hill Carnival. Every year, my heart sort of sinks as this thing comes around. And looking at aerial footage of it yesterday, I just thought it just doesn't look any fun. It's so unbelievably overcrowded, so dirty, just fundamentally dangerous. I'm not really sure why anyone goes.
Well, Alex Wilson, Assembly Member for Reform UK in the London Assembly, was talking about the serious threat of crush. There's, as you say, narrow streets where you've got over 1 million people descending on Notting Hill. I mean, this is why he would argue, and I think Reform's position is, move it at the very least to Hyde Park, make it a ticketed event, treat it like a Glastonbury essentially, where the money will be able to then pay for the security and help with any clear-up and avoid the mass littering, urination on the streets, crime, as you say, vandalism on houses and shops that takes place that costs you and I as taxpayers to have to sort that out, especially when coppers from across the country are being drafted out of their natural communities to have to come down to London, meaning the streets of other places are being left more unsafe.
Yeah, exactly. And I know one of the other topics you wanted to talk about this afternoon was the epidemic of shoplifting. And doubtless, you know, when police are already very thinly distributed and are then diverted for events like this, it only makes that other stuff, the other kind of petty crime, and of course also through the ranks of crime, there's a knock-on effect. And, you know, the shoplifting thing, I think, is such an interesting one because it's that sort of very thin end of the wedge with crime. You know, if you have a permissive attitude and approach towards the apparently small stuff, and I don't happen to think shoplifting is a small deal.
Yes.
I think it's actually a really big deal. But we've developed a system that treats it as a very minor, trivial matter. And that then percolates, I think, into a much wider attitude towards crime, you know, the sense that you can get away with stuff that's smaller, and then you just keep pushing the boundaries and pushing the boundaries. And just looking into the shoplifting scourge, I was interested, I didn't actually realise this, that research suggests that around 70% of shoplifting is actually linked to drug addiction. And that is in no way to make it excusable, but it does shed some light, I suppose, on, well, obviously the source of the problem, but also other solutions. And those that have looked into this, and indeed those in the criminal justice system, have suggested that one of the ways we could tackle this, apart from deterrence, which, by the way, I think is very, very important, is just having a better and more efficient and comprehensive approach to addiction. At the moment, the NHS is so poorly set up to deal with addiction. I have some family experience of this, unfortunately. And, oftentimes there's just nowhere for addicts to turn. There isn't a system really that deals with the most serious end of addiction comprehensively. It's okay if you're wealthy. I mean, it's not actually okay under any circumstances.
Totally.
If you're wealthy, you can at least pay for rehab, but it's just not really there.
Isabel, you hit the nail on the head, and like you, family experience with, sadly, addiction and and serious mental health, and the system is just totally farcical when it comes to actually trying to get meaningful support without basically family members putting their lives to one side, impacting their ability to earn a living too and move forward without and having to step into the breach. And as you say, this shoplifting thing, actually, to be fair, the Liberal Democrats, who would have thought them getting tough on law and order? They've done the digging into the numbers, and they found a record 530,000 shoplifting offences were logged in England and Wales in the year to March 2025, with 289,000 cases ending up with no suspect, roughly 793 cases a day. Only 18% resulted in a charge or summons. The Met charged in just 6% of cases and closed 77% with not a single suspect. And we know there's groups like Crush Crime, for example, have been saying that we know 80% of crime is committed by around 10% of of individuals. So isn't it? It's just looking bad. Lib Dem MP Josh Reynolds has called for advice for bystanders to confront shoplifters, which has been suggested as frightening and dangerous, and pushes scrapping police and crime commissioners to fund frontline policing. I never thought I'd say this, Isabel. I actually agree with the Liberal Democrat. I don't know what the point of a police crime commissioner actually is, and it seems a huge waste of taxpayer money.
Well, I am in favour of confronting shoplifters, or at least alerting the security staff in supermarkets. And I've done it myself, and was disappointed that the security staff did absolutely nothing. They just carried on chit-chatting and allowed this person, I think they sort of made towards the person as they left the shop, and then claimed that because the person had left the premises, there was nothing they could do. In fact, they had plenty of time to intervene before the person had left the premises and just didn't really want to. And the truth is that most of those security staff, not all, but most of those supermarket security staff are not paid very much at all. They're not necessarily trained for any kind of contact with individual shoplifters, and they're probably told basically don't try to tackle somebody if you catch them. And they are effectively ineffectively just scarecrows.
Well, another story, Isabel, with crime, is another gift I would suggest to Reform UK, is prisons are due to apparently run out of spaces entirely by March unless more inmates are released early. So we've already seen, I think it was around 1,700 inmates released early. Now the government's been getting advice that suggests that in their sentencing bill that they're apparently preparing, they're going to abolish most sentences under 12 months to prison and replace them with tougher community penalties. They're pushing a Texas style, I'm sure they're trying to sound like they're Trumpian here, earned progression, early release model, so well-behaved inmates can leave after 1/3 to 1/2 of their term. I suspect you and I both know that means 1/3, not 1/2. And spare places in the men's estate apparently have already dropped to just below 1,000 that's left in the system. I mean, Labour have released, I think, early now, 26,500 people through the 40% standard determinate sentence scheme that's the 10th of September 2024 and 31st of March. And I think they've actually recalled an extraordinary amount of those individuals too. The Home Office will, however, say, but we've got rid of 5,200 foreign national offenders. They've been deported since July 2024. That's a 14% increase in the previous 12 months. I mean, do you reckon, how's this going to play politically? I mean, it's a gift to Nigel Farage, right? When we say anyone with under a 12-month sentence is going to not go to prison at all. But Lucy Connolly puts out a very stupid tweet, deletes it and apologises within 4 hours, and she was sentenced to 31 months.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a joke, isn't it? And I just don't see the point of very extended, suspended prison sentences. Always found them very weird. I'm sentencing you to a year in jail, except you don't actually have to be in jail. You can serve it at home. unless you do something wrong, in which case you might go to jail and then you might get out, after a third of the time. All of this is a nonsense. Deterrence works. It really does work. You're always going to have a hardcore of people that have got such big problems that they commit crimes anyway. But you only have to live in countries where they mean business in their attitude towards tackling crime at all levels, from the pettiest thing to the most serious, to see that it is actually an effective way of doing things. If you've got a strong government and it takes the smallest of crimes seriously, you tend to have quite a safe society. And that's what I think we should be aiming for, not the opposite. We've just got to create more prisons until we create a culture that doesn't involve a casualness about petty crime.
And this is the problem, isn't it? Because the Conservative Party don't get to boast about this and try and use this as an albatross around Labour's neck. They're the ones who didn't build the prison spaces to be able to house more prisoners. And they themselves even released people, or at least some people even say they called the election before they had to release some people to avoid those optics. And then, of course, Reform UK have been criticised, I think, bizarrely for suggesting, well, can't we knock up some Nightingale-style prisons for these kind of smaller offences, even though I don't think any offence like you is small. But for those sentenced to 12-month sentence, more of an open-style prison, let's knock up these Nightingale prisons so that we can use those and, like you say, have still the deterrent of you will go behind bars, you will not be allowed to sit at home. I mean, it blows my mind that, as you say, someone like Hugh Edwards, literally found guilty of paedophilia and having indecent images of children, is allowed bail and given a suspended sentence. Lucy Conley, as I say, does a very stupid tweet, knows she did a stupid tweet, deletes it after 4 hours, apologises for it. No, 31 months in prison and held on remand until her trial. I mean, it's just bizarre.
I think you make a really good point about offences against children, and far too often I read cases of individuals who have been found guilty of making indecent images, and in some cases, very, very large numbers of images that have been found on their devices, obscene images, the creation of which at origin will have caused untold suffering and lifelong trauma to those little ones who are abused in that disgusting way. And yet, time and again, judges let these paedophiles walk free. I don't understand that. To me, that is a multiple more dangerous and offensive to society than any white collar crime. As you say, you mentioned Lucy Conley. I'm sure that this government, that's going to be an albatross around their neck, that case. Maybe Keir Starmer has actually bothered himself to read up on the case now, because you may recall that he notoriously said some weeks ago that he wasn't familiar with it, which was either a lie or absolutely downright negligent of him as Prime Minister. So I just think that all of this can only really be addressed with quite a hard line, rather than the opposite, which is what is being proposed by this government. Every turn they seem to suggest doing the precise opposite of what the majority of voters want.
It's so true, Isabel. I laugh because I'm sort of I don't know what else to do. To be honest with you,
that's
anymore.
all we've got. You just almost have to find it funny. I was sort of laughing at Angela Rayner in a canoe this morning. The pictures are comical, aren't they? To encapsulate the state of our country. I do really like Angela Rayner. I think she's got great spirit. I admire her life story and where she's come from to get where she is. But that image of her slouching in a kayak or whatever it was, vaping away, looking like a sack of potatoes, which she doesn't normally. She's a glamorous lady, and it isn't generally about looks, but it's not really a very good image for our country, is it?
No. Some people would suggest that floating on a sort of blown up device on the water right now is the last thing that any
I couldn't
image
agree
is
more with
needed.
that. Just keep away from the rigid inflatable boats and anything else on the sea at this point.
And let Ed Davey be the clown who likes to throw themselves in the river and embarrass himself. Isabel, if I could just quickly ask you one final question. Saqib Barty, Conservative MP for Meriden and Solihull East, was on earlier. I thought it was quite a punchy interview to sort of at Reform. It was the first time I've heard a Conservative MP actually come out swinging. He accused Nigel Farage of being a protege to Michael Foot and no longer being a Thatcherite. He obviously points and cites the fact that, for example, Nigel Farage wants to nationalise part of the water industry and is talking about lifting the two-child benefit cap. I mean, What you've been around British politics, is that a tack line that's going to stick? Is this something that Reform are going to have to think about when it comes to making sure the sums add up? Or do you think this will be seen by what I must say is lots of my texters and callers, is the Conservative Party can talk all they want. They're done. The voters don't trust them.
Well, I'll go along with the second, that the Conservative Party are done and no one is listening to anything they're saying. And I think comparisons with Michael Foot are really not going to resonate with the vast majority of people aged under, I don't know, 60. I mean, it's a bit of an old comparison, isn't it? When was Michael Foot? Far too long ago. I mean, most Reform voters, or a great deal of them, as you know, Jonathan, are in their 20s, in their teens. You know, Reform also has very, very solid support in the older demographic. But, you know, none of those teenagers that are drawn towards the party, none of those young people in their 20s have any idea about comparisons with Michael Foot. All they want is a strong leader that has solutions that instinctively feel as if they're going to work. And there's only, in my opinion, at this point, one party that is actually offering that. And that's not to just be biased. I'm very happy to give the Conservatives and Labour credit where it's due. I'm just really, really struggling to find any place where credit is due at this point. Otherwise, I would happily give it.
I agree with you, and what I find bizarre is there's this attack. Oh, Nigel Farage and Reform don't give us any detail. Well, they've produced now, I think, 2 different bills, literally drafted legislation, ready to go, albeit some would argue maybe over smaller bits of legislation. We're due, I think, tomorrow, the actual detail of this mass deportation bill from Reform UK, who have stuck their neck out and given us quite a substantive amount of what they're willing to do. But no one seems to really ever hold the Liberal Democrats and the Greens, particularly the Liberal Democrats, who could feasibly end up propping up a Labour government in some sort of coalition. We never seem to scrutinise those bills. In fact, the Conservatives seem to have been given a free pass to expect that we have no policies whatsoever, yet everyone bangs on about where's the detail from Reform. I mean, I remind people, we're only a year in. Last time I checked, we've got the manifesto still 2-3 years away at the very least.
Well, actually, you know, I'm not a member of Reform, but I am a Reform supporter, and obviously very, you know, actively so. I would take that level of scrutiny of Reform as a great badge of honour. It's a sign of how far the party's progressing, and I don't think the party leadership resents it at all. You know, the fact that they are being looked at so carefully shows just how seriously the media and the establishment and the opposition parties, and indeed the governing party, take the threat that is posed by Reform. So yes, they're under ridiculous level of pressure to produce detailed policies. It's daft to produce very detailed policies 4 years in advance of an election. We all know that things can change dramatically in 4 months, never mind 4 years. So Reform, if anything, is surprising me by how much they're coming out with. And as long as the pressure continues for them to do more and provide more detail, we will know that those calling for those details take Reform very, very seriously, and rightly so.
Isabel Oakeshott, Talks International Editor, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your views. We really appreciate those.